You don't know for sure? That's, yeah, they always put him to sleep when they did that, didn't they? Yeah. You tell them just put in a zipper. Tell them just put in a zipper. Zip. Yeah, a grease cert. That's even better. They can squirt some of that rooster comb in there. All right, we're in Ecclesiastes. Let me ask you a couple of questions about chapter 2, and you're free to look at chapter 2 while we're doing this. What kind of research did Solomon do in chapter 2? What kind of research did Solomon do? What's chapter 2 tell us about his research? Every kind of pleasure. And which pleasures did he deny himself? None. That's kind of a trick question. He did not, anything he thought of that he wanted to enjoy, he got it. He had all the resources available as richest king in the world, brought them all to himself. What was the result of his research? Everything was vanity, emptiness, futility. Okay, that's another aspect of his research. Can't take it with you. It's going to be left here. And that's another one of the reasons he said it was all vanity. And it was vanity because it was what was happening where? Under the sun. What's another phrase that he uses a couple of times? Under heaven. Okay, that was another description of what it's like. But it's happening under the sun, or a couple of times he says under heaven. I think he's talking about the same thing. What did Solomon conclude near the end of chapter 2? And it wasn't the part about vanity. That's one of his conclusions about his research. But there was another conclusion he came to near the end of chapter 2, and we discussed this at the end of last week's class. Anybody got that? Okay, PJ? Okay, that's it. Now, if you'll pay attention, you'll see this probably about 6 more times in Ecclesiastes. He comes back to this same idea. Nothing better for a man than to eat, drink, and tell himself that his labor's good. In other words, when you sit down to a feast in your home and your family is well clothed and warm and taken care of, don't feel guilty about that. Just thank God. Thank God for the good things you have and enjoy it. All right, chapter 3. I need 3 readers. There's Carrie, 1 through 8. Yeah, 1 through 8. Look at my notes here. Then 9 through 15, PJ, and Mark can get 16 to 22. See if you recognize this first part. looking at the first 8 verses, make some observations. What do you see about those things? Anything at all?
There's a parallel to them.
What's that?
There's a parallelism to them. When it's time to work, a time to rest. You know, when you work, you need rest.
Okay.
Parallel working and resting.
Okay, so it's not a time to work and a time to chew gum. It's work and rest, things that go together. Mike?
It'd make a good song.
Makes a good song, yeah. It really does. What else? Judy?
Oh, this is kind of like his. When I was in grade school, the elders and the church that we attended, they put a clock up on the side of the wall, and underneath it they wrote Ecclesiastes 3, 1-8. And it caused all of us that were the same age, about 10, 11, 12, to start reading about that.
Really?
Uh-huh.
How about that? Gary?
I think he's saying there's a time for everything.
Yep. There is time for everything. Now, one of the observations, however, that I like to make about this is, he doesn't say there's a time to be honest and there's a time to lie.
That's true.
Or there's a time to be moral and a time to be immoral. There's a time to be faithful and a time to be unfaithful. There's a time to be chaste and a time to be sexually impure. He doesn't bring up anything that's wrong or immoral or against God and say there's a time for that. What would Sweet Brown say about those kinds of things?
Ain't nobody got time for that.
Ain't nobody got time for that. Solomon doesn't say, he does not allow that there are times and places where we're supposed to do anything that's right, wrong, or immoral, or unethical.
You know, another thing that's interesting here is we hear and see a great deal of there should be no war, there should never be war. But what Solomon says, there's a time for it.
Yes, I'm glad you brought that out. How many of these things are not necessarily pleasant?
Well, half of them.
About half of them. When you look at some of these, well, time to kill. Is there any pleasantness in killing? And yet Solomon says there's a time to kill. I don't think he's talking about animals. Mike?
What's a time for hate?
Good question. Time for hate. David wrote in the Psalms, I hate those that hate thee. What did Jesus say about our relationships with family members?
He used the word hate, but he means love them less. You must love that less, or hate doing that. In Matthew, where he talks about that, if you love mother and father more than me, you're not worthy of me, but if you hate them less, you love me.
What's it mean to hate? What is hate?
Despise.
Extreme despise.
Okay, we've got other words like these that are synonymous with hate. Hate is an emotion that we have that fires us up against something. Sometimes it's against someone. But there is a time to be against. Now, for years, growing up, I knew members of the church, and this was their constant mode. Against. They're against everything. And their identity as Christians was based on everything they were against. I don't see Jesus being like that. When you read through the Gospels, what was he about?
Love.
He was about
You
love.
can be against something, and you can be against an activity, or you can be against there has to be love in it.
There has to be a standard.
I'm not saying you shouldn't stand up for what you believe. You should, if you have someone that's coming against you with something that's not scriptural, that's not whatever, you can not like what they're doing. You can hate what they're doing, but you hate the sin, not the sinner.
Okay?
And you hate sinfulness. I think that, to me, that's what that means. There's a time to hate. Well, to hate, you hate sinfulness. You hate the things that simple people do. You don't naturally hate the person maybe that's doing it, but you hate the sin that they're committing.
Does this have any relevance in our present culture?
Yes.
And the answer to that is duh. Anybody been on Facebook? Any of you who get on Facebook? What's the present discourse on Facebook?
Defining marriage.
It's all about defining marriage, homosexual rights, same-sex marriage. Have you seen the little thing that a friend of mine thought was supposed to represent bacon? It's a square, and I think is the square red and the two marks in it are pink. Somebody saw that. I think that's bacon, and it's supposed to be an equal sign, and the idea is same-sex couples are supposed to have equality with heterosexual couples. I hate that idea. I hate the ideas that are being put forth that are false. I hate the arrogant spirit with which most that I've been in contact with, put this idea forth. And I hate the idea that one of their tactics is, oh, Marty Kessler is a homophobe. What does homo mean? Well, we know what that means. That means the same. Hetero is different. Homo is the same. What does phobe mean? Afraid of. Are we afraid of them? That's what I'm afraid of. I'm also afraid that I might fail, because we're talking about love. That's how we got onto this. I'm also afraid that I may fail in the love department if I don't warn some folks and give them what I know to be truth in spite of popular opinion. It is not love to let somebody go in the wrong direction without warning them. Now, obviously we know some people, they're going to go regardless. They don't believe in God. They don't believe in the Bible. I understand that. I don't want to force what I think is right on them. However, people who profess Christianity need to know what the Bible says, especially. I think everybody needs to know, so they can at least be aware and informed. But especially people who claim to be Christians. It's not a matter of being arrogant. It's actually a matter of great humility. It's a matter of submission. We submit to what we know to be right, and based on the submission to what we know to be right, we understand a compulsion to talk to people about this in a loving fashion, in a way that gets our own egos out of the way and puts the Word of God forward. There's a time for everything. There's a time for things that are not pleasant. There's a time to hate. There's a time to love. There's a time for war. This is spiritual warfare. There's a time for peace. And rather than get bogged down, and I don't mean bogged down in a bad way, but we could talk about all the details of all these things, but the bottom line is just what Gary had said when we got started with this. Solomon is trying to explain to us that in the course of life, in the course of everything under the sun, there's a proper time for everything. Proper time for everything and everything in its place. Jesus talked about a garment that has a tear in it. What do you not fix a torn garment with? New material. Why not? Because when you get it wet, the new material will shrink and it'll make the tear worse than it was to start with. Same thing with the wineskins. You don't put new wine in old wineskins because it'll burst the old wineskins. In other words, everything has a place and everything needs to go in its place. There was an old covenant, there's a new covenant. When you fulfill the old covenant, you put the old covenant away, you embrace the new covenant. That's basically what Jesus was teaching as far as I believe that part of that parable. And Solomon is saying there's a time for everything that's good under the sun. Not necessarily everything that's pleasant, but everything that's good. Everything that has a place needs to have its place. And sometimes there is a time and place for war. There is a time and place for killing. There is a time and place for hate. None of these things are supposed to be the singular identity of our existence, but all these things have a place. There's even a time to be silent. And there's a time to speak. And it's not always easy to know which one's which.
Unfortunately, though, I think too many Christians have read it. There's a time to be silent, and we haven't spoken up against the things that we should.
Well, if
That's
you...
not in that verse.
What's that?
That's not in that verse, though. It doesn't say be quiet. Just like she says, though, people have taken that to heart. Well, I'll just be quiet. But the scriptures don't teach that right there. So.
The devil loves extremes. Faced one today about this very subject. Somebody wrote, well, who are we to judge other people?
And we've taken that to heart.
Oh, yeah, we've taken that to heart. Oh, well, you're right. I shouldn't say anything against this because I don't want to pass any judgment. Listen. I'm trying to get people to understand God's judgments, not mine. If God had not handed down a judgment on this, I'd be one of the first ones to say, well, then I'm not going to stand up and be counted against it. But God has handed down what he thinks about this, what he believes about this. And so as his servant, as his soldier, I don't have any other choice. Not that I want another choice. Because if you're a soldier, what you want is orders. One of the worst things to happen to you in the military is not have something to do. And that's what a lot of the military was. Hurry up and wait. Hurry up and wait. Stand in line here. What for? I don't know. Just stand in line. And a lot of the military jobs, it's just the nature of the jobs. It's about 90% downtime and 10% panic. Because that's just how things tend to work in the military. You're not really producing anything. It's not like you go to work in a factory and you build something all day long and then you go home tired at night. You go to work and you train at something that you don't actually do because you're not at war. Billy?
Carter's good saying, they pay me for what I know how to do, not what I do, because when I have to do it, they've underpaid me.
Right.
You know, it's how you look at that.
Yeah.
Because in the military, infantry, airplanes, whatever, there's times, like you say, hours on hours, you don't do anything. But you can't fix an aircraft at 40,000 feet. It needs to be fixed right on the ground the first time.
Now, one of the differences between being in the military and being in the Lord's Army is that there's always something for a soldier of the Lord to be doing. It might not be in your career field. That's what they call them, at least in the military. But it's something that you can do as a soldier. And that's one of the things that made the American military so effective during World War II. Because for the most part, American troops had a sense of responsibility and initiative. And even when commanding officers and NCOs were killed in battle or taken out of the battle by wounds or whatever, there was somebody else to step forward and say, okay, guys, follow me. We know what we're supposed to do. And they went and did it. Happened over and over and over again. And that's the same way it needs to be in the church. Instead of soldiers finding reasons to lay back, they found reasons to push forward. Somebody had a hand. Where did I miss it?
Marty?
Oh, Bonnie.
It does say there's a time to keep silent.
Yes.
I'm not disagreeing with anything that anyone said, but I think the important thing is to remember that there's balance in these things.
Yes, that's the whole point.
There's a time to speak when we should speak, but there's also a time to keep quiet and listen.
Right.
Because if we're doing so much talking, then people are eventually going to tune us out because we're talking so much. But if you can find balance where you're at least attempting to listen to whether it's homosexuality or whatever it is, if you listen and then speak, they may be more open to what you have to say.
Absolutely. And if you truly listen.
If your heart is right, like if you're doing it for the right reasons.
One of the misconceptions we have is that if we listen patiently while someone's telling us something stupid, that we're justifying allowing them to say it or justifying what they say. And that's not true. No matter how wrong somebody is, how off base somebody is, if they're telling you what they're thinking, listen to them and do it respectfully and give them the dignity of really hearing them out. And we also have a problem with this. While somebody's talking, instead of listening to them, what are we doing?
Thinking about what
We're formulating our response, which doesn't make any sense because if we haven't heard what they're saying, how can we properly respond? A third misconception. We've got to have a response immediately when they get done. No, you don't. You can listen to what they say. And I have never gotten the impression that because somebody allowed me to have my say, that they agreed with me. And so when we allow someone else to have their say, no matter how dumb we think it is or how ungodly we think it is, letting them have their say can effectively cause them to think, okay, you respected me, now I'll respect you. Have any of you ever seen The View? There are a lot of TV shows that I see and I wonder, does this even exist? That's one of them. Because nobody ever listens to anybody on that show. It's just all these women going 90 miles an hour at each other, and whoever can holler the most thinks they're the one who's got their idea across. And it's just crazy. And if you're ever in one of those kinds of discussions, probably the best thing you can do while that's going on is just keep quiet. And eventually somebody's going to notice, like, why aren't you saying anything? And then maybe they'll give you an audience. Billy and then Kathy.
Marty, I see this two situations here, time to keep silent, time to talk. We kept silent, too silent too long for prayers in church, in school. And what happened?
Yeah.
There's no school, there's no prayer in school.
That's right.
This same situation is gonna come about. This gay marriage thing will pass because there's a lot of liberal people out
Because
there,
we are
and we have
silent.
been quiet too long for this not to be taken out of the situation.
That's right.
And it's a sad day coming.
That's right.
Kathy?
This is a little different, but with the family that I have, with adopting children and trying to work with them, we had to go through a lot of therapy. I want you to think about what the therapist does with you. The therapist sits there and listens to you. The therapist doesn't give you answers. He gives you suggestions. He makes you work for your answers. He makes you do it yourself. He gives you suggestions. He doesn't enable you. He doesn't take your side. Nothing happens, but you have to look at yourself and you have to come to your own conclusions. And I think a lot of times that's what we have to do with people is we can't give them their answers. We can't tell them what they need to be doing, but we can tell them what the Bible says, but we do have to listen to them, but we can't enable them. We have to let them know. By not speaking, by agreeing or just not speaking or allowing them to do whatever they want to, we have said it's okay. We have enabled them to do whatever it is they're going to do without letting them know or having them search their own conscience. And I, for one, am very guilty of that.
That works. That works when you're dealing with somebody who wants to come to some kind of truth. If they want to come to a conclusion that helps, that works.
Well, and if they don't want to come to a truth, then there's not much you
Then
can
you're
do about
wasting
them.
your time.
You
There's not
can't-
anything you can do for them anyway.
Right. So many of the discussions that I have, especially on Facebook, and I don't know what you all think about Facebook, but so far I've found Facebook is great. I can talk to more people about spiritual things on Facebook than I ever could just in a regular day's time. And I never know who's reading those things. So many of the responses that I make on Facebook and so many of the things that I say are not just for the people that I'm particularly responding to, but it's for other people who may be listening who are really questioning and searching for some kind of truth, because I might know this person I'm talking to doesn't give a flip. They don't care. God from heaven could come down and talk to them face to face and they would still, I don't believe it. That's just the kind of people they are. But other people are always listening. Other people are always watching. And that's the way it is with your life. Somebody's watching you, and even if they don't hear what you say, they will hear how you say it. And I don't know how many times what Kathy said has been true. I'll be sitting talking with somebody, and they're telling me all this stuff, and all I might have to do is after they go through and kind of taper off a little bit, well, what do you think you should do? And then they sit there and they tell me what they should do. And that's what I would have told them, because I'm so smart. And when we're done, they often tell me, wow, I really appreciate the help. And I haven't done anything, and I feel like such a goofball. I feel I could have been a stump. just sitting there.
But you listened to them.
Yes, and they came to their own conclusion because they were looking for truth. Brothers and sisters, when you're with somebody who's looking for truth, help them discover it, not by necessarily preaching it to them, but by letting them come to the conclusions that they already know are right. And you'll probably know when they know those conclusions. Other times, and this is when you have to have a little discernment to try to figure out when should I shut up and when should I talk. Other times, you got to get in there and you got to let some truth be known. I'm not saying wedge your way in or fight your way in, but when you get an opportunity, when it presents itself, say something. Say something. Make your voice heard, or rather, let your voice be heard. Because somebody out there wants it. Who climbed the tree to see Jesus?
Zacchaeus.
Why did he do that?
He was short.
He was little. He couldn't see. He was in a crowd, but one guy climbed the tree, and Jesus said, Zacchaeus, come down. I'm going to go eat with you today. And it changed his life. So there's somebody out there that wants to hear the truth, and we may never know who that is. And there's a time and a place for all these things, is what Solomon is saying. Did I miss any hands? Oh, Mike.
Well, I was just going to say, as concerns what Billy said a while ago, when I was in grade school, we had part of our instruction was to learn the Ten Commandments and things like that. And nobody taught us this as church doctrine. It was good moral doctrine that the teachers were presenting. It was a foundation for a good moral life, and that can't happen anymore because somebody got it in their craw that this was against the Constitution. Separation of church and state as a claim, which is not in the Constitution, that particular phrase. And so everybody sat back, and I shouldn't say that. Enough people sat back and didn't do anything till that you can't have a Christmas tree on city property or whatever else. You know, they've stripped religion or Christianity, I should say, out of the public place altogether. And nobody was teaching church doctrine by what they were doing. But it was...
And the really crazy thing is, this idea of separation in church and state, it's a real idea, and the Founding Fathers did come up with it. It's not in the Constitution, but their concept of separation in church and state was, the state's not going to tell us what to do. And it's been made the opposite. We're not going to allow the church to say anything. That's the way they interpret it today, when initially the Founding Fathers meant that to keep the state from suppressing any kind of religious expression.
Yeah, and not making one state-run.
Yes.
Like they do in the
We're
Church
not
of
going to
England.
have a state religion, so that religion cannot govern everything that's done in religion. That's the way it was done in Europe. That's still the way it's done in Europe. If you live in Germany, at least it was this way when I was there in the late 70s. You either had to register as a Catholic or as a Protestant, and then you paid your taxes to the church based on how you registered in the country. That was the way it used to be in Germany. State church, state religion. You don't have that here. They got away from it.
Well, you know, even before that, when the church became so strong, it wasn't that the state ran the church. At times, the church ran all the governments.
Oh, you mean in Europe?
Yes, in Europe.
Okay. Sure.
So-
And it was corrupt.
Very. So, you know, you do need a separation of church and state so that they don't infringe on each other.
But the Constitution says Congress will not enact a law
Exactly.
concerning the establishment of a church.
As a state church.
Right.
And that's exactly what it says, to establish a law. In other words, they can't come up with any law to put on the books to establish a church. But from that position, they've taken any moral portion of religion which might be a part of public life and pull it out. It's gone. It's not there anymore.
Now, I want you
The
to,
atheists have won.
well,
No, they will never win. They will never win.
this is going to be cyclical because it's sick, cyclical because it keeps going around and coming back. But we have to remember, when Jesus said that we're supposed to be salt and light and cities on hills, he was talking to people who were Jewish in the Jewish community. Every one of them should have been that. But he was really talking to people who were going to be his disciples. And he didn't say, you need to hammer out your culture and hammer out your government and make sure that everybody toes the mark according to the kingdom of God. That's not what he taught. He said you're supposed to be salt. You're supposed to be light. We're supposed to be influencing the world by our actions, by our behavior, yes, by what we say, but we're not the ones who make demands in this world. This world belongs to the devil.
We're at the church.
Do we understand that? God has given him sway. He's the prince of the power of the air. And what we're supposed to do is have the best impact that we possibly can with the gospel. And it's going to be a battle until he comes back. We're never going to get things right. That's why Solomon said here in the beginning, you can't take what's crooked and make it straight. It's always going to be crooked. Jenny?
Well, speaking of a time to be silent and time to speak, yesterday,
Well, I'm sorry, I don't ever get a call.
Yesterday, one of my students, they bring things up in class, and it's,
I can't get up
you know,
and
you're
run out.
afraid to even answer some questions in class because you don't know what other student's going to go home.
Are you
with
even
their
allowed to
parents.
hug a kid these days?
Well, I don't. I high-five them, but,
Okay.
you know, but she asked me, they were having a discussion in their little group, and she said, isn't God, Jesus, and the Holy Spirit the same person? And I was afraid to answer that question because you never know what other 22 ears are listening. Then they're going to go home and say something to their parents, and then I get called into the office or there's a lawsuit or something. And I just always, you know, it's really sad that you can't even answer questions like that
Oh, yeah.
anymore in school. And I always just say, you need to go home and talk to your parents about that because I really want to answer the questions, but then I could lose my job, you know?
And that's the sad part about it.
That's what's sad.
That's the sad part.
Think about how things have changed and how God must view us from heaven. He's looking down on a nation where a godly school teacher is afraid because of rules and regulations put in place to even speak about him or his son or his spirit to a little child who's inquiring.
Marty, that kid's heard something somewhere, and the best way to answer that would be, that's a good question, what do you think about that? And then you don't answer, let the child answer it for himself.
Well, there's all kinds of ways
Ways
to
to do that.
to deal with it, but
But like she's right, you can be sued, you can be hauled down there, you can lose your job.
Oh, I love being my own boss.
Oh, don't.
yeah. Somebody else, Dave, you had a hand up?
Oh, I've had it up several times. It's okay, you know. I was just gonna
We'll
say,
get you a flag to wave back there.
now, are we really in the Lord's army? Are we?
So,
Well, you hope so, don't you? Well, here's our orders right here.
Yeah.
It doesn't, and love's in there and everything else, but it also, you know, sometimes we don't need to be politically correct.
Amen.
And I'm sorry about people that are so afraid they're gonna be judging someone. But sometimes when somebody's wrong, you take a ball peen hammer and you hit them in the head. That's what I did, and I left Tinker for it.
Dave is calm down in his old age.
Josh?
I'm just gonna kind of break the subject, but, you know, I have a younger brother who's not medically well, and, at first, I, denied it for a long time, and, you know, sometimes I'm wondering if I'm, you know, if I'm denying it or not, but over the years, you know, we've seen him, my family and I have had to do things that nobody should do. And his oxygen level is getting lower and lower every day. And just, you know, recently I've started doubting my faith. And, you know, he's everything to me, and he's the reason I'm here. And when
Does Drew doubt his faith?
Yeah. No, him.
No,
Josh.
Does Drew doubt his faith?
he knows where he's going.
Yeah.
But
Josh, do you think sometimes people like Drew are here to show us what real faith is? And the reason I ask that is because when it's easy to be faithful when everything's going great.
Yep.
When the sun's out and you've got good health and you're prosperous and your kids are doing well and your grass is growing and you don't have to mow it or whatever. When everything's going great, sure, it's easy to be faithful. But I think Drew is showing us what it's like to be faithful to God when your life is not rosy.
I'm not ready for him to go yet.
What's that?
I'm not ready for him to go yet.
None of us are.
No, I'm sure you're not.
I'm going to do everything I can to keep him here.
Yeah, and that's what faith does. You keep doing everything you can. Do you feel helpless?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
do.
That's the same way all the rest of us feel.
But he knows how you feel about him.
Oh, yeah.
And that's tremendous because that gives him the strength to just try a little bit longer. So
When this is all over, I don't know if you'll be able to see it now, but when it's all over, you'll be stronger. You used to run. Do you still run?
I stopped doing that. I stopped everything.
But when you used to run, how'd you feel when you pushed yourself as far as you could go?
There's rush, you know, energy.
You just drained?
Yeah.
Yeah. Did that make you stronger the next time? Yeah. That's the way it works. That's the way it's supposed to work. That's why when we studied James talked about count it joy when you fall into various trials, because the trying of your faith works patience. And when our faith is being tried, it doesn't feel good. We might not be able to see the good outcome, but there will be a good outcome if you stay faithful, and you have stayed faithful, and you're watching Drew stay faithful. And these things that we've been talking about here in Ecclesiastes, a time for everything. There's a time for what Drew is going through, and there's a time for what you're going through. But that time won't last forever.
Well, I want something good to happen. I'm tired of all this and all this bad stuff happening to us. I just want something good.
But there's somebody watching you.
And the
It
good-
might not be anybody in your family, it might not be anybody that you know, but they're watching you to see how you're handling this.
I don't.
Yep.
And it's not that you're doing things to say, I'm doing good or I'm doing bad, but Drew's life is going to be honored by the way his family honors him. And when he's gone, you continue to honor him, and you are honoring God.
And Marty, what the good part's gonna come out of this, even though death is sad, he receives eternal life. And that's what we're all looking for. That's our, you know, I've had friends in the same situation. You don't understand why they're dying, what's happened to them, but yet they spurred me to stay faithful to the end because they did. And that's what it's about.
I'm just afraid I won't be able to forgive God for taking Drew.
I'm sorry?
I won't be able to forgive God for taking Drew. If
You will.
Yeah.
You will.
I just don't feel like it now.
It's a process. Now, I'm sure you don't feel like it now, but it's a process. Just give it time, brother.
But the fact that you're already recognizing that is a good beginning.
Oh, yeah. It's like when you get hurt. When you get hurt, the pain is a lot, and you can't imagine, oh, how is this going to be better? And then time goes by and it's better.
This is different.
If you could have gone up to see little Keely with me yesterday, if you could have seen her a year and a half ago, when that dumpster impacted her head. And we all wondered, is she gonna survive this? And then you go up there and you see, yeah, she's gonna survive. She's got, you can see the surgical scars across the top of her head, but her little face is perfect. She's a beautiful little girl, and she's sitting up in bed after brain surgery, talking to her grandma and coloring with crayons. Her motor skills are great. She looks up at me and says, hi, Mr. Marty. And but you would look at a situation like that a year and a half ago and go, oh, this we're never going to come back from this. And yeah, you can come back. And you'll come back, Josh. You don't see it right now, but just give it time.
I'll never see it.
Yes,
No.
you will. Yes,
Give it time.
been there.
Boy,
A year ago, I lost my dad. He had a long, full life, he was 88 years old. And, I'd like to have him back. But at the same time, I don't want to call him back from where he is to suffer with that bone cancer that he was suffering. I know where he is.
right. And that's one of the questions sometimes we have to ask ourselves. Am I really hurting for them, or am I hurting for myself? Am I hurting for them because they're in this situation, or am I hurting for myself because of what I'm suffering based on what I think they're going through? And that's what we have to do when someone dies, when we have that kind of a loss. We got to do some self-examination.
Marty, when
Yes.
we have a loss, God is not the one that caused that loss. God doesn't take people away from us.
Especially when
Just life.
he takes them to be with him.
Right.
Sometimes it's better just to let them go.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, that's what they want, really. We don't, a lot of times, we don't know what they want, but they just want to go on.
If
People get tired of suffering.
They do.
Yeah.
They really do.
If you look at Luke chapter 16, Lazarus was a poor man. He was laid at the rich man's gate. He was laid means he didn't get there on his own. He didn't walk there, oh, my day to beg at the rich man's. Somebody had to carry him there and lay him at the rich man's gate, which tells us something about his poor condition. Well, he died. Where'd he go?
Abraham's bosom.
He went to the bosom of Abraham. If somebody would have come to him and said while he's in the bosom of Abraham, hey, Lazarus, you want to go back? What do you think he said?
No way.
Hey, no way. This is great. Paul wrote in the book of Philippians, the letter to the Philippian church, I'm in a strait between two, having a desire to,
Stay and go.
a desire to depart
Depart.
and be with the Lord,
Or stay.
but it's better for you if I stay. There's,
And Marty, that's the blessing part right there. It's a beneficial for us, it'll be beneficial for Josh, the experience he's going through, the encouragement he's gonna have for other people to know they can get through that. Most of us have all been there,
yeah.
You learn from this experience, and yes, there's times when you blame God or whatever, but you go back to the scriptures, there is a time to be born, and there is a time to die.
There's a
And we
time to
can't
weep,
stop- And we can't stop that.
time to weep, a time to laugh, a time to mourn, a time to dance.
The day of one stand.
So dancing's okay. If anybody asks.
That's right.
I don't think the prom was in view, but there is a time to dance. All right, that's the second bell. I appreciate all the great